today we have a webinar with Jaishree Subrahmaniam, and Jaishree is a first-generation PhD graduate from India, and she founded and leads the Paksh program, which is a mental health support group that supports academics living abroad. And I think we're quite interested in people who are running kind of interventions, and to see kind of how effective these interventions are, and to see what we can learn going forward as a community. That Paksh is part of the Lotus STEMM networking and leadership platform for South Asian women in science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine. And Jaishree is a passionate mentor of young girls and women, and helps them to find fulfilling STEM careers. Her own research focuses on plant evolutionary ecology, and in plant biology you have altruism and cooperation, that plants can help each other. That's at the moment, Jaishree is working as a Mary Sklodowska-Curie Actions Individual Fellow at the Aarhus University, and it also chairs the Marie Curie Alumni Association's Policy Working Group. And so with that, I will give the floor to Jaishree, and she can tell you all about her work.
Thank you so much, Brian. You actually stole my first slide so with that amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I first want to actually thank ReMO for organizing this series of webinar, but not only for that, for all the work you're doing to create an awareness about mental health, and also the interventions that you were talking about, and just to promote general mental well-being in academia. I think, I think everyone here can resonate with the impact that ReMO is having and continually having on the community right now. And thank you, Brian, personally also for letting me be here and to present Paksh for you all. I just have to share my screen for a moment. If you, I think this is the one. Can you please let me know when my screen is visible?
It's beginning to start up. It's there now. And now you can share on full screen. Perfect.
Okay. So like ReMO, like Brian just mentioned, this webinar is on interventions to support academics. And one of the things I'm going to be focusing on is Paksh, which is the intervention that we came up with to support the mental well-being of academics. But before I go into that, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction, something that Brian already mentioned about what is it that I am currently. Firstly, I'm a scientist. As Brian mentioned, I'm a plant evolutionary ecologist. I am a Marie Curie fellow currently working at Aarhus University. I also am a science communicator, and I believe I can call myself a science policy enthusiast, because I recently started venturing into this whole frame of science policy advising, for which I work with the Marie Curie Alumni Association. I recently was elected to chair the policy working group. I also sit on the board and I'm the external policy advisor for Initiative for Science in Europe. We have a lot of activities, but my core focus for Initiative for Science in Europe is basically on open science. And relating to that, I also recently took over the position of guest advisor for Open Research Europe's plant ecology section. That's about the science communication and science policy aspect, but I'm also a social worker. As Brian mentioned, I'm a first generation PhD graduate, and I come from India. I realized a long time ago the privileges and the opportunities that were presented to me because of where I was born, and and by count of having parents that were educated and that understood the importance of having their girl children educated, actually. So I've been working with a lot of NGOs ever since I was in India, to basically focusing towards working with underprivileged children and women and help them find a path towards education. And similarly, for the last 3 years, I have been, since I moved out of India, I started working with Lotus STEMM, which is a Canadian nonprofit that helps and supports South Asian women in their STEM journeys. And I work in a lot of activities with the Lotus STEMM, including mentorship, which Brian was mentioning. But most importantly, I developed and I lead the program they have, which is Paksh. A little introduction about what Lotus STEMM is. Like I mentioned, like it is a globally registered Canadian nonprofit organization. Our mission is to provide a networking and a leadership platform for South Asian women and non-binary folks in STEM. This was this NGO its roots are in Canada, but now we are trying to expand our reach across all continents just to have access and opportunities to all South Asian women that might need it. Our vision is to have an intersectional cultural lens for a bigger and a greater representation of South Asian women in STEM. And we have our commitments towards outreach, representation, and research. To get into a little more detail about the activities under all the three umbrellas of Lotus STEMM, we have a plethora of activities that we do with Lotus STEMM. First, STEM outreach, for instance, we have a chapter for girl kids who are less than 16 years old. And we just bring them and we talk about interest that they may be interested in, topics that they may be interested in. We also have a workshop called Family and I Code Together, which is a very fun activity for parents and children to come together and learn how to code. We also have something called as Teach Me in 5, which is where people come and teach these kids their research and their topics or whatever they're working on in under 5 minutes. And this also gives a very nice way for those kids to be interested and further pursue, if they want to, science. Representation is another huge pillar for Lotus STEMM. We have a flagship program, which is the Lotus STEM mentorship program, under which we pair mentors and mentees in either one mentor with multiple mentees, or it's often a one-on-one connection where we actually really support the mentee for their personal, very specific goal. And this is one of the programs where I'm also associated in, and I work with them. I've been working with them for the last 3 years for that. The Pond is another very interesting initiative for representation, because we usually talk about very less represented women scientists across. They might or might not be South Asian women, but their life stories, their struggles, their paths to STEM, all of these things are discussed in the Pond. It's a very, very interesting activity, and you do not have to be a female or a South Asian to be a part of any of these activities. I just have to highlight that. It's just it's an organization that was created by a South Asian for South Asians, but we have expanded since, and we understand more and better, and anybody who's interested in joining can be a part of it. And this is just a brief list of activities, and you can go more into detail if you go into the website of Lotus STEMM. I will not spend a lot of time discussing what Lotus STEMM does, because I want to discuss more about Paksh. But again, before that, I want to talk about my personal experience about why I do everything that I just talked about. Why is that important? So being an international student is a very, very exciting experience. I'm sure everyone who has ever moved out of their house to pursue their dreams can actually really relate to me on that. But I also acknowledge that it comes with a lot of unique challenges, like you have to settle into a new culture, a new curriculum, a new way of life very, very quickly. And this is all on top of having to leave your entire support structure, the friends, family that you may have in your home countries, right? My story is actually really similar to those millions of immigrants who pack up their hopes and dreams in 46 kilos of baggage allowance, and then they move abroad. And like leaving your loved ones behind and struggling between who we used to be and who we would like to be in a completely foreign environment. It can actually take a toll on you. My personal journey on understanding complex lives of plants has taken me across 3 continents. I've worked and lived in India, I've worked and lived in America, and I've now currently live and work in Europe. So I have had the privilege to actually experience 3 really different types of work environments, not just cultural environment, but also the environment inside a lab. But you know, I struggled when I moved all these countries to follow my dream. Obviously, like anyone else, I also struggled to fit in. Everything was so new. But I mean, I was in a place where I was the only female person in the team. I was the youngest, and I was the only non-native person in the team where I was working. Competitions between students for seeking the validation of your PI was such a strong feeling that I have personally experienced, and also I think to some extent indulged in. And I'm not here to defend myself on that, because I came from the time where it took me 3 years to leave my home country to be able to convince my parents to pursue what I wanted to study. But coming here, where I realized that everybody was as good as me, everybody was, everybody is supposed to be the best version of them. I was also in that very competitive form, in the competitive format, and I needed to succeed because it's because of all the things that I had undergone to make it till here. It took me 3 years, like I said, to convince my family to get this chance. And I, like all immigrants, my kind, I needed to keep landing jobs to survive the visa and the financial burdens that come with being a foreign student. So toleration was something that I had actually accepted unconsciously as a norm, because talking about things would mean creating trouble, and it would hamper my chances of actually landing another job in academia. To give you an example of the lived experience that I've written here, on one instance, one of the lab favorites was actually caught photoshopping a picture of me to a body of an older woman who was being kissed by an Indian guy. And this picture was not only created, it was printed out, sent out to my team members, and pasted right outside my office. Now, you would think that I would have complained right away to higher authorities and did something about it, right? But when you reach a point where you lose respect for your own self, that's the lowest that any person can ever be. And that's exactly where I was, where I was thinking that my entire self-worth lies in the hands of the people that I found awe-inspiring. On another occasion, I was made to eat chips, dirty chips that were fallen on the floor. And I was told that if I don't eat it, they will not move the car because I was in a car. All of these things that when I think about it now, seem to me that maybe it was so wrong that happened to me. But at that particular point in time, all I could think of was, if I do this, then that means that my relationship with this person is sustained and I will have a recommendation in the future. I will have a job in the future. I need to keep that contract, that visa. I need to have that financial thing to survive, to stay in abroad. And that on top of all the burden that I already had in my back of having to make that move in the first place. So it was a very bad time, but I feel like I was in a very, very dark stage of my life, but I never really spoke to anyone about it because, the walls of canteens of the scientific institutions, only you can hear the echoes of science, of grants, of money, of papers and all of this. Mental health is not a topic that was discussed. I think, Brian, you might agree with me. Before the pandemic hit, we didn't actually discuss as openly as we are discussing right now, the mental health crisis of academia, of academics. But also, I was told to keep quiet because it would have costed me everything that I had worked for. I knew that I needed to talk to somebody. I needed to get appropriate help. I realized that having a support structure for academics is so important. And now looking back, I realize it now. But back then, when I sought out to seek help from the university counselor, that person did not speak English. So I want to highlight here the fact that there was a very recent study that was published. I think this has been making rounds in Twitter also. This was, I think, very recent paper on published in August in Nature that talks about this international imbalance, how there are certain sections of researchers that are disproportionately more vulnerable to be the recipients of bullying and harassment. It is because we have, I'm not belittling anybody else's struggle, but being an international student, I can really relate to the struggles that other students might also have, because I know for a fact that I'm not the only person who has faced these circumstances. Being belittled, the door being shut on your face, you being given unimaginable amounts of work, working through all nights, you being asked how many hours of sleep did you get, because if you got more than 5 hours, you're not doing enough work. So all these things have happened not just to me, and I know for a fact that this happens a lot under those four walls of scientific institutions. But I also know for a fact that the reasons that I mentioned for my lack of talking about this out in the space stays true for everyone else. We fear that you have to be, I don't know why we have this impression that you have to be tough if you have to be a scientist. You cannot talk about your vulnerabilities because that just probably means that you're not cut out for the path of the sacrifice that science requires of you. I now have come to believe, to understand how wrong that understanding is and how we really have the importance of talking about it, not only to our peers, but also to people when there is a problem, to talk about it, to raise these issues, because you never know who else might be going through it, who might get the strength that they need to talk about this and to actually eventually get help. And all of this actually did happen to me, but just to take a step back to talk about this crisis of mental health in academia. There is another paper by Nature where students were surveyed, more than 8,000 students were surveyed, and the statistics say that more than a third of the surveyed participants have been told that they've sought help for anxiety and depression during their graduate studies. And this number is alarming because not a lot of students even come out and seek help. And in the same survey, more than 60% of those students say that they are afraid to talk about these issues and raise these issues for the fear of retaliation, for the fear of losing their visa, for the fear of losing their jobs and future prospects. And even though the onus lies on institutions, on PIs or whatever, the help is not being given. There is a bridge, there is a gap that needs to be bridged between the students who need that help and the people who are there to provide you with that help. And I recognized this a long time ago because I myself was graduating in the middle of a pandemic, and I was preparing my manuscript. I was getting ready to graduate, and I had a multiple breaking points at that point. And because of the continual harassment and bullying that I was facing at that point in time, it actually almost made me quit my PhD and actually do quite worse to myself. But how could I go back home a failure? I needed a PhD. I needed a good recommendation. I tolerated. It's not that people were not unaware. And that is the scary part, because it often happens that you might know about somebody's behavior, but because of their academic excellence, this might not pop up in their CV, for example. This is not something that people usually discuss openly, right? And I eventually, I decided that I wanted to stay invisible till the time I get my degree, until the time I have the recommendation or I have another job prospect before I actually do something about it. Because at that point, I was really struggling to find help. I could not talk to even my peers about the kind of struggles that I was facing, because whenever I did, everyone was just shying away. They were supporting me in private, but when it came to actually talking about this in open spaces, there was nobody was willing to take that chance. And I completely understand why as well. And but when I did find that support from Lotus STEMM, because that's how Rupali, the CEO and founder of Lotus STEMM, came into my life. And she actually gave me that encouragement and that strength to speak up and talk about it. And I eventually did. And I will talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. So that's what I did. I found, I realized that the biggest lesson that stems from my PhD is that our understanding of the greatest benefit that comes from our evolution is the ability to be helpful, to be kind to each other, to be nice to each other. So I set out, I talked to people. I really wanted to understand the underlying systemic problems that exist on why somebody faces these mental health crises and what are the factors that make you more vulnerable, for example, to be prone to having such issues. I started advocating and participating in policy-making initiatives at national and international levels. This was helpful because it was in the middle of a pandemic, so I had some time to read through, to understand, and to actually formulate a plan on how do I go about doing this? How do I make sure that nobody else goes through what I went through? So finally, because of all of these things, I decided I wanted to help. I wanted to be an ally. And that is what is the result, is Paksh. So to tell you about Paksh, Paksh basically is derived from a Hindi word, which basically means to take side. Paksh is a group of academics, and it's a mental health support group that is comprised of just academics, and we connect members to each other by sharing experiences, learning from each other, supporting one another, and hopefully forming long-lasting friendships. The reason Paksh is designed this way is because academic struggles are very unique in the sense that people who are not from an academic background might not be able to understand the kind of pressures that we may face. It's often very self-inflicted pressures that we put on ourselves, the deadlines, the report, the grant, the applications, all of these things. And I thought that maybe an academic, no matter their age, their background or their scientific field or whatever, might be able to empathize and understand and provide that that leaning support to another academic when and if they require it. And sometimes just having that leaning shoulder is all what you can do, and you don't know how far that can go. We provide a very safe, non-judgmental, closed space for academics to talk to each other and to mingle with each other. And the way we do it is we make members of this closed group. We meet every 2 weeks. We meet via private Zoom calls, and we also have private Slack channels for participants. And the topics of those the topics of the discussions that we have around Paksh are usually the stuff that everybody or most of us can actually relate to. And the way we structure the session is the first part is talking about the problem, about sharing personal experiences, about there is no time limit as such. So you can talk as long as you want, as much as you want to talk. And then any session and every session ends with a set of actionable tips that we give to the participants on how to cultivate a good mental well-being, not only with respect to that topic at hand, but a more general one as well. And that's basically what Paksh is about. Our journey so far is, we started, as I was mentioning, during the pandemic, where it all started with me discussing my personal journey and my experience in academia with Rupali, who's the CEO of Lotus STEMM. And Rupali, being a South Asian woman, a scientist herself, has also had similar struggles in her academic journey. So the way we connected with each other was basically just this one factor. And then we started to plan the pilot phase of Paksh. We had the first phase of Paksh in 2020, between June and September. We had 7 sessions, and then we ended it. And then the second session was in last year, where we also had 7 sessions. And now currently we are in the works of launching the third phase of Paksh. To talk about some of the issues that we have discussed during the sessions that I mentioned. The first one is here, as you can see, we created these graphics to make the topics more relatable to a large variety of audience. So one of the topics was finding your identity inside and outside of academia. When you introduce yourself, actually, like if you come and think about it, when you introduce yourself to somebody, what do you say? You call yourself a doctor, a scientist, a teacher, a CEO, whatever. But have you ever sat and wondered why it's always that we put our work as our description? That's the first thing that comes to us when it comes to describing ourselves. And this happens to us, I think, very unconsciously. When we progress through any career, actually, it does not stay true for just academia. But I think being in academia, I can personally relate to the fact that we are so consumed by our work through the day, throughout the night, that this is all that we can think about. That means also that our success in our project will directly correlate to our personal feeling of validation or feeling successful. And when things are not going well in the lab, so if you have a failed experiment, for example, then all of your self-confidence comes crushing down because you feel your entire self-worth is dependent on that one particular project or one experiment or one paper. So the first session of Paksh was actually basically just to address this one topic and to talk about how we should actually talk about expanding our own understanding of what it is that we are, because we are not robots, we're not machines here that we are supposed to just wake up, get up, go to the lab and do the work. You might have good days, you might have bad days. We all do, we are human, right? And similarly, when you have a physical ailment and you cannot make it to work, it's equally okay for you to take a mental health day off as well. And just to make people internalize this concept, this was just one of the topics we discussed in Paksh. We also have discussed other topics like depression and anxiety in academia. We've talked about academic bullying, about self-advocacy, about a very big one, the impostor syndrome. And these, like quantity over quality, a lot of these discussions are held around topics that a lot of us can really relate to, even if we do not have personal experiences to it. We know somebody that has went through it. We know some story. So just to talk about it in a way that you really understand the impact that these things are having on your own self is the basis of Paksh. And just to help them to push through it, to provide that support that you might need, and to give you tips and tricks on how do you overcome certain things and how do you cultivate an excellent mental well-being. That is what Paksh stands for. To give you some of the scores from our impact assessment, like I was saying, we have had 2 phases so far, and though we do not have a lot of participation has increased obviously significantly, but we do not have extensive participation because I am the only one who leads the session. So I would prefer to have a group which is smaller, which is not to say that I would refuse anybody who wants to be a part of it, but Paksh is a very small community right now. But even with that small community, we have impacted over 20 people over the course of these 2 phases that we have had. And as you can see on the left side, there is a very small, tiny bar graph that shows about our impact scores. Because with each session, we have feedback forms that we send out to participants, and then we ask about their opinion on the session and also what they want to talk about in the next session. So it's a really back and forth kind of a relationship that we hope to form, and something which is more natural, which comes very organically. And I think we're beginning to see that, because through the courses of the sessions, even during one phase, we observed that the feeling of inclusion, the feeling of being included in the discussion was increasing through the course of these discussions, because the same set of people meeting every 2 weeks, talking about a different topic, talking about some of the most vulnerable things that they think about to somebody who does not know them personally. And maybe that is why it works, because they don't know you personally. You don't have those preconceived notions or impressions about that other person. It's just one human being speaking to another human being at a very core humane level, if you know what I'm saying. So we've observed the actual direct impact of this humane connection that we've been aiming to form with Paksh. And on the right side, as you can see, that we have some testimonials from the participants who talk about how Paksh has personally impacted their lives. And I'm really happy to report that even though Paksh has ended the 2 phases, the participants, 3 of the participants from the first phase actually became members of Paksh and helped me to design the second phase now. And the same thing happened with the second phase as well. We have more and more people wanting to come in and help us out. And we are expanding the whole Paksh chapter to actually go outside of Canada. And that's something that I think is really important, because we have not been able to do it so far because of the lack of funding and resources. But we are actually really planning on getting that done in the near future as well. And hopefully we will have something even better for the third phase of Paksh. To talk about some of the lessons that I have learned personally through my journey to understanding mental health and mental well-being in academia is, first of all, it's very evident at least from the recent pandemic, that the mental health of academics needs urgent attention. If we really want to support the current and future generations of scientists, to make those scientific leaders, to overcome the challenges our planet is facing currently, the plethora of issues, we really need people to be in the best possible shape to combat those challenges, to come up with solutions to overcome those challenges. And for that, this is super important that we talk, and not just talk, we take steps to address the mental health crisis of academics. The second one, I can't believe that I have to actually write this down, but it's true, that onus lies not just on institutions or on peers or on PIs, it lies on all parties. You cannot, I know that when you are at the receiving end of a problem, you almost feel like maybe there is nothing that we can do about it, but that's often not true. You cannot think about the times that I quit thinking that there would be no help, but I was just looking at the wrong place. That does not mean that you have to give up. I mean, I think the one thing that the pandemic has taught us is the fact that the help is available. Geography is not a problem anymore. We are sitting across, I don't know how many time zones right now and attending this webinar. And the thing is that we can make it happen if we want to. And every single party involved has the responsibility to make sure that this happens. And what happens is that equitable, timely, and adequate mental health support is given to each and every academic if they require it and whenever they require it. This should not be an ask, this should be a given to us all. From all of these things, what did I personally gauge from what we can do at, firstly, the individual level in order to cultivate a good mental well-being for academics? Is the first thing, like I was saying, The biggest lesson from my PhD also talks about how being nice, being kind, being cooperative is the key, is the way for the survival of any species. So I would urge each and every one of us to actually really think about it this way as well, that science inherently, and actually any research inherently, is collaborative in nature. Whatever we do, we're doing it based on somebody else's work. So it's inherently very collaborative and not competitive. If you're competing with each other, both of the parties involved will be at the costly end of the bargain. But if you collaborate and mix your strengths, then you will create something which is so much more better and beautiful. The second one is seeking training to learn to talk about communication with empathy, which is so important, because I think the way we are taught as academics to write, to talk about our work, has a huge impact on how we even speak to people who are non-academics. So I think that the training on how do we manage people, how do we manage teams, is super important for academics at all stages, I think. And it's okay to be vulnerable. You don't have to show up a very strong face at all times. It's okay for you to accept, even for just yourself, that you are a human being and you will have good days, you will have bad days, and it does not take anything away from your competence if you're having one of those bad days. It's okay. I mean, it's something that has to, your passion for doing your work has to come from a place where you are feeling calm, content, and happy. And if you are constantly feeling scared or stressed, I think that does not help anyone. So it's okay if you're vulnerable and you're asking for help. It is okay if you do ask for help. Give credit where credit is due. The reason why I have mentioned this point is because this is another thing that has happened to a lot of international academics, including myself, that the work that is given, that is done by a student or a person, is not often acknowledged in the proper way that it's supposed to be. But if you are an individual, if you are a early career researcher, or you are a PI, it does not take much to give the credit, to appreciate that the work that somebody else has done. I'm not talking only about giving credits on paper. I'm talking about a word of encouragement, something to acknowledge that you appreciate the effort that has been done by another person. That alone can go a long way. You can't even imagine that. And giving credit where it's due is not going to make you little anyway. And remembering that each one of us is unique. We all have our strengths, our weaknesses. We all have some areas where we struggle. We all have some areas where we are very, very confident. And this brings me back to my first point. If you integrate and you collaborate and you cooperate, you can obviously benefit, all of you can benefit at the same time. But remembering that every member is unique, they've had a different background, a different cultural understanding of things. Integrating that in your understanding and your communication will really help not just you, but also that person. And treating your lab members as your teammates, because it is a teamwork. It's not one person's effort at the end of the day, right? So I really think that these are some of the things that I personally feel that can be done at the individual level. But not only that, like I was saying, the onus lies on all levels. So talking about what can be done at a group level, again, I'm mentioning this again here, that you need to foster collaboration and not competition. I'm looking here at people who manage other people who work in their organizations or labs or whatever. Competition is a very inherently negative emotion. It can be good in some small bursts, but a prolonged feeling of feeling competed against can really take a toll on you. And I think the onus lies on somebody who's on one or two levels higher in the hierarchy to really push forward the message that you are doing this at the end of the day for a project which is bigger than you. Then you don't have to compete against somebody else in order to achieve something. And again, the second point, treating your lab members as your teammates. Again, it's super important to cultivate that collaborative, happy environment in the lab, because if everybody who's working in the lab feels like they are a valued member of the team, the productivity level is bound to rise. As opposed to if everybody's feeling that even within the team, they're competing against each other, I don't think that can help anyone in the long run. The third one, and this is super important also, putting mental health conversation on the agenda. I'm not talking about having extensive, I mean, you can do it, of course, if you have the time or the abilities to do it, but I'm talking about asking very simple questions. How are you really feeling today? On a Monday meeting, when you have your team meetings, just asking this one simple question. What did you do on the weekend? Did you have a relaxing time? Like really pushing that message of having a life outside of your lab, having a life cultivating an overall personality, having a good work-life balance. Talking about all of these things is important because you are dealing with not just a scientific concept, you're dealing with human beings. So putting that mental health conversation is super important, I think, for us to even stop feeling that it's a taboo topic, even within a team. And this one, addressing bullying and harassment. I cannot stress how important this is obviously because of my personal experience with bullying and the lack of support that I thought that I had at that level when I was going through it. I think that if you have a hint that somebody's probably not going through something that's acceptable or appropriate in the workplace, if you even know somebody that you think is going through this, talking to them, really addressing this issue should be a priority for everyone, because I have personally seen way too many cases of academics not only leaving academia, but doing so much worse to themselves because of being bullied and harassed into the profession that they chose. We as scientists put a lot of effort into getting trained into this field of expertise. We have very specific core sets of expertise, and science needs these experts to be there to do the kind of work. And I have seen way too many people leaving the entire academia industry, academia, just to be not being able to tolerate this environment, and that is not right. I think talking about these things is the first step to addressing them, and I think that should also be put on the agenda. And the next one, destigmatizing failures and celebrating successes. That something that I thought that did not happen as much as I would have wanted to have it seen, at least in the institution where I was in, is there was so much importance being put to failures. But you didn't do this work, your experiment did not work. Like all of these things were focused or highlighted so much more than celebrating the small wins. Oh, you didn't break a glassware today. I mean, I'm sure, that's not a correct thing, but comparison, but I'm saying that it's equally important for you to know that, okay, I didn't do anything wrong today. And that, for me, at least, that is a successful day in my book. So addressing that and accepting that you might have good days and you might have bad days. You do not have to be completely broken down when you failed something. But at the same time, remembering that having those tiny successes are also success. You never climb the mountain in one go. You always have to take 1,000 different steps. It's an uphill battle. So taking one step should also be reason for you to celebrate that success. I mean, and the next one, respecting working hours, personal schedules, public holidays, vacations, not feeling the need, not feeling guilty that you're working only 16 hours a day is something that should not even be an ask from a scientist, especially when you are already undergoing so much pressure. The feeling that you have to continue to be productive no matter what your mental or physical status might tell you is a very, very negative way of continuing to sustain a long-term journey through academia. And I think that then again, I know this has to come from an individual level, but if knowing the academic situation and the academic hierarchical environment that is, I feel like if it comes from a person who's on the top level, really pushing forward the message of you need to go out of the lab. You cannot work for more than these many hours. You will not be contacted on a public holiday. These things need to be on the table. These things need to be told to these early career scientists, especially, that it's okay for them to do these things. It's okay for them to go and have a life outside of the lab, because at the end of the day, it's not a do or die situation. You have to be able to live and enjoy the work that you're doing. And the last but not the least, promoting the all-over well-being of your members, not just their academic excellence, but their personal well-being as well. And this should also be put on the agenda at the group level. And then finally, what can be done at the institutional policy level is firstly addressing mental health issues, especially bullying and harassment. This is important, taking into account all different perspectives. I'm sure you guys are probably aware of a lot of cases that have recently been highlighted. One of them is actually from the Max Planck Society as well, about PIs being removed from their positions because cases of bullying and harassment were highlighted against them after the pandemic. It actually exacerbated this entire situation. But this has actually, I think, given a lot of courage and strength to students who did not probably feel before that they had that they even talking about these things can help in any way. But I think addressing these issues is a step in the right way, but we have ways to go, we have miles to go even in that. And the second is having a supportive infrastructure component. The thing that I was mentioning, my university counselor did not even speak English, and this was the only one person available there in the entire campus. And this is a campus that prides itself for having a very strong international background. So this gap that exists between wanting to have excellent students but not being able to provide supportive infrastructural components that will ensure that they're actually doing the best that you called them here for is super important for any institution, I think. And that this can include having a comfortable HR, a person that can actually provide you with all the mental health information of all the support structures that are available to everyone at the institutional level. So really highlighting these things, these interventions, these activities that exist even at the institutional level is it's something that can really help the students to know that, okay, there is help out there. I can seek help. It's okay. And the last one is having service components, which is like having liaisons with NGOs and police and things like that, because I feel that a lot of students, like I was mentioning from that survey, do not feel that they are comfortable to talk about their vulnerabilities, their mental health issues within institutional space, within an academic space. So what do you do for those students? What can we do for those support to provide support to those students? I think for them, it's very important for them to be culturally informed, to have a culturally informed approach to help those students. And for them, maybe the institution might not have all the support structures that are needed. So in those cases, it's okay for them to highlight the fact that there are these other NGOs or support structures available for them to seek the kind of support that they might require. And that should be at the institutional level. To talk about some of my personal takeaways, to some of the personal takeaways is, if you take care of the people around you, they will care for you when you need it. Your papers, your funding applications may not. You're not alone. So it's not scary to ask for help and support if you need it. The third one is listen to your body before things get worse. This happened to me and I cannot stress this enough. Enjoy all the good things in life because they are present even during the difficult times. Like for me, I enjoy looking at plants a lot. And I used to before look at them only in a greenhouse or in a lab. But since this, I have taken a point to go out in nature and enjoy a walk in nature just to appreciate plants even more for at least 15 minutes a day. And that's something I do, but you may have your own way. But it's important for you to remember that you have a life outside of your academic walls. And the last one is don't think too much, because there are so many things that we can't even predict. So why do we have to waste our time trying to think about things we can't even have control over? So all these things are just what my personal takeaways are. And just to end with telling you all that Paksh Phase 3 is coming really, really soon. We are actually in the works of that. The advertisements for registrations will start in September 2022. And we realized that even though Paksh was started for international academics, through the course of 2 years, we have realized that there are a lot of systemic and cultural barriers that exist to prevent people from getting the kind of mental health support that they require. And then certain sections of academic spectrum, including minorities, sexual, racial, ethnic minorities, international students, women, etc., and so many more, may be more vulnerable to these issues than probably the rest. So we are hoping to have a more culturally informed approach of Paksh for the next phase on. And please keep an eye out if you're interested in it on the Lotus STEMM website. We will put out the registrations in September really soon. With that, thank you so much for giving me the time and for listening to me.